Welcome to the Foundations of Math 1 Unit 7 Study Guide. In this video, we will be discussing the Objective 1 questions numbers 1 through 4. Let's take a look at question number 1. Okay? After reading the question, you should find at the end that it wants to know what is the height after 2 seconds. Okay? So we take that 2 seconds and we figure out, okay, it gives us a number, but what does this number represent according to our question? So it wants to know what is the height after 2 seconds. So if you look at what the variable stands for, height is in, or h of t is in meters, and t is in seconds. Well, if you look, 2 seconds, that means that that equals our t. So our t is 2, and just as our notes on the side here tell us, we're just going to plug that 2 in. So we're going to take our original equation, h of t equals negative 4.9 t squared plus 21t, and then everywhere we see a t, we're going to take this 2 and plug it in. So I'll have h, and then I'll put a parentheses, equals negative 4.9, and then I have a t, so I'll put a parentheses, okay, plus 21, and then I have a t, so I'll put a parentheses. And instead of writing t, I'm going to put 2 in all those spots. Okay, so where there was a t, I put a 2, where there's a t, I put a 2, and there was a t, so I put a 2. Okay, and so now we're going to multiply it out, and you get 4. Here, 2 squared is 4, and then that's times negative 4.9. Okay, plus 21 times 2. And then here, you'll get 42. And then that would be, when you multiply this out, you should get negative 19.6 plus 42. And then these two will combine and give us 22.4. So after we've plugged it in, you get h of 2 equals 22.4, or the height at 2 seconds is 22.4, and then it's always in meters, so you put that m in there for the meters, but 22.4 meters is the answer. Okay, so anytime you read a question and it tells you a time, you just plug it in. Let's look at questions numbers 2 and 3. They are together because they are linked to the same question. So I'm going to blink this out so that we can see. Okay, and really, you just need this equation, and we're going to use that for both of these questions. So the first thing that we see is it asks for the maximum height. Okay, so we see maximum height, maximum height. Vertex is the word that should come to mind when you see maximum height. So it asks for how many seconds to the maximum height, and then it also asks what is the maximum height. So you'll actually need both parts of the vertex. How many seconds is the x part, and how high it is the y part, or the plug it in part. Okay, so for question number 2, we're going to come over here, and so we know we need the vertex, and we're going to use x equals negative b over 2a. And we're going to figure out, okay, my a equals, my b equals, and my c equals. Well, a is the thing that has a square on it, so that's the negative 16. B has just the letter with no square, that's 64. And c equals 80. And so now, we're going to plug that in, so you have the opposite of b, or negative b, so the opposite of 64 is negative 64 over 2 times negative 16. Okay, so that's negative 64 over negative 32, which equals 2. Okay, so our x, basically if you sum that up, equals 2. So in our vertex, you have the point 2 comma something. Well, this is also, we don't really have x in this equation, where x normally would be, it would be normally x squared here, and then x here is t. So this really stands for t equals 2, which is the time. So how many seconds is 2 seconds. Okay? And in order to find how high it went at 2 seconds, this tells us the height at a given time. So if we plug in the 2 for that, you'll get negative 16 times 2 squared plus 64 times 2 plus 80. Okay? So you get negative 16 times 4, and then 64 times 2 is 128 plus 80. Okay? Negative 16 times 4 is negative 64 plus 128 plus 80. And then negative 64 plus 128 is 64 plus 80. And then you get 144 when you combine them together. And then this is feet per second. So H is going to be in feet. Okay? So this is going to be 144 feet. Okay? So the answer to question number 2 is 2 seconds and 144 feet. Both of those will be the answer. Or you get the vertex of 2 and 144. So that's 2 seconds it takes us to get to 144 feet. Okay? So now, looking at question 3, when did the ball hit the ground? So you think ground, okay, you got solutions, roots, zeros, and then what goes in the ground? Okay, the roots do. And then what do the roots need? They also need that water. Okay? And then the last thing that we're missing, solutions, roots, zeros, is the x-intercepts. Okay? So now how do you find these things? Well, you set it equal and you solve. To solve, you could factor, you can graph, or you can do the quadratic formula. Okay? So I'll show you all of these methods, and then you can pick the best one for you from this. Okay? First, if we're going to factor, so this is the factor method. You're going to take that negative 16t squared plus 64t plus 80, and you're going to, just like it says, set it equal to 0. Okay? Then you're going to look for a GCF. Now, when I do the GCF, I'm going to try to get this to be a positive t squared. Okay? So I'm going to say, well, what goes into 16, 64, and 80? 16 goes into all of those. Okay? So I'm going to divide by 16, and then I don't want it to be negative, so I'm going to divide by negative 16. Okay? And so that gives me a 1t squared. This gives me a negative 4t, and this gives me a negative 5 equals 0. Okay? So now I'm going to do my x. Okay? And I have 1 times negative 5, which is negative 5. And then I bring down my negative 4. So I need to know what will multiply to give me a 5, and then subtract to get me a 4, a negative 4. And so I know 5 times 1 is the only thing that will give me a 5. And then to get a negative 4, I need to do negative 5 plus 1. Or 1 minus 5 will give me negative 4. So then I take t, and I got negative 5, and t plus 1 equals 0. And then, then I set each of these equal to 0. So t minus 5 equals 0, and t plus 1 equals 0. Because in order to multiply two things together and equal 0, either one of these has to be 0 or both of those has to be 0. It's the only way you can get a 0. So now I'll add 5 to both sides, and then you get t equals 5, and then I subtract 1 to both sides, and I get t equals negative 1. And so since we're dealing with a real life situation, okay, if you scroll back up, we're talking about throwing a ball into air, okay? Can you have thrown a ball into the air -1 seconds from now? No, because we can't have negative time. Time doesn't work that way in real life. So t equals 5, which is 5 seconds, okay? So the answer would be 5 seconds, okay? So now, if you're going to do it via the graph, okay, we'll pull up our calculator. You'll use the calculator to do it via graphing, okay? You'll go to y equals, and you'll enter in the equation, -16x squared. This is our variable button. So anytime we want to enter a variable in, x, t, theta, and n, you'll use that button to do it. And then you have plus 64t, and then plus, what was that, 80. Okay? And then you'll go down here, and you'll put 0 in, okay? Because we're looking for our zeros. So it's equal to 0. Okay? Then you'll hit second trace, which is to calculate, and we want to know where it intersects. Okay, so we'll go down to the intersect button. Okay, and you get a kind of a visual. It looks like it goes through -1, and it looks like it kind of goes through 5, but we want to see it. And remember, we have a negative answer and a positive answer. Since this is real life, we want to talk about the positive answer. Okay, so the first curve, just press enter. Second curve, press enter, and then it's going to say guess. And what this wants you to do is take that cursor and move it closest to the one you want. So right now it's really close to this one. So if I pressed enter, it would tell me what this one is. But I want to know what this one over here is. So I'm going to drag my cursor by hitting the right arrow until it gets right about where it is. And you can see it's at 4.89. It's really close to 5. If I press enter, bam, it's going to tell me that the answer is exactly 5, so x equals 5 seconds. Okay? So that's how you do it via graphing. So now, if I wanted to do it using the quadratic formula, I know my a equals -16, my b equals 64, and my c equals 80. Okay? So the quadratic formula says -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So now I'm going to plug those in. So opposite of b, I get -64 plus or minus the square root of 64 squared minus 4 times -16 times 80 all over 2 times -16. Okay? So then you want to take and put all of this in your calculator. So I'm going to pull the calculator back up. Okay? I'm going to get out of this, and I'm going to type, and I'm going to put it in parentheses, 64, and I'm going to square it minus 4 times -16 times 80. I'm going to press enter. And so then I get, in this little circle right here, 9216. Okay? So I have a square root of that, plus or minus, and then you have -64 all over 2 times -16 is -32. Okay? So now I'm going to hit second square root, and then the way you get that in, you could just type 9216 if you'd like, but what if it comes out as something crazy? You hit second, and then the answer button right here, if you pressed it, it would put that in. So I take the square root of that, and I get 96. So you get -64 plus or minus, and it just becomes 96. Not square root of 96, just 96 over -32. A lot of people like to keep it in the square root. We used it, so we can't keep it. Okay? So I'll scroll down a little bit. So now you're going to break this up into -64 plus 96 over -32, or -64 minus 96 over -32. Okay? So then 64 and 96 should give you 32 over -32, which is -1. That's one possible answer. Or negative 64 and negative 96 give you negative 100 and, what is that? Let's see, that's a 10, so that makes 160 over negative 32, and then that gives us a positive 5. So those are our two possibilities, and then keep in mind this gives us, it's x equals this, so x equals this, and technically our x is our t, and so we're talking about time, so 5 is the only one that works. 1 will not work because it's negative, and we can't have negative time, so we get 5 seconds again. Okay? So that concludes our work with 1, 2, and 3. Let's move on to question number 4. So you got a rocket launched, and it says, when will it hit the water? So we need to figure out, what does that actually stand for? Well, remember, water, roots, the ground. Okay, roots grow in the ground, roots try to get the water, that's how they're all related. X-intercepts, zeros, okay, they're all the same thing, solutions, okay, and they're all found by doing factoring, by doing graphing, and by doing the quadratic formula. So I'll show you by factoring, graphing, and the quadratic formula. So first, factor. You have negative 16 t squared plus 138 t plus 54. Okay? And then we're going to set it equal to 0, and then we're going to solve it by factoring. Okay? So I'm going to show you how I would do this if I didn't have my calculator with me. First thing I'm going to notice is I don't know if 16 goes into 138, but I do know that they're both even, so I could try to take out a 2. And then I want it to be a negative 2 because I want to get rid of this negative sign on my t squared. So I'm going to divide by negative 2. Okay? Now this may not be the GCF, but I don't know what the GCF is right off the top of my head, so I'm going to work my way into it. So then I'm going to get 8t squared, and then this will give me a 69. So I'm going to get a negative 69t, and then this is going to give me a negative 27 equals 0. Okay? So now I know 3 goes into both of these, but 3 doesn't go into 8. And actually 2, 2, and 2 give me 8. And 2 won't go into 69, and 2 won't go into 27. So these are pretty much GCF'd all the way out. Not pretty much, they are GCF'd. So now I'm going to do my x factor. Okay? I'm going to get negative 216. And I'm going to get negative 69 down here. Okay? So now, these are bigger numbers. I'm not going to expect you to know how to factor these all the way. And I'm actually going to double check and make sure it's 216. That's 56 carried to 5, 16, yeah, 216. Okay? So I'm going to show you, this is how you do it in your calculator. You'll go to y equals. You'll clear out whatever's in there. Okay? You'll type whatever's on the top, negative 216, and then you'll divide it, and then you'll by x. And then you'll type the exact same thing again, negative 216. Divided by x, and then you'll add x. And then you'll hit second graph, which gives you the table, and then we're going to look for negative 69 in the y2 column. And if I scroll down, you'll see negative 69 there, so that means negative 72 and 3 are my solutions. So I go 3 and negative 72. Okay? So say you don't see it here, and watch, I'll come over here and I'll try to scroll down. It'll let me scroll down, but then I try to scroll up, and it won't let me scroll up. You're like, I can't scroll up. I need to go up. That's because you need to be in the X column to scroll up. Something weird with the calculator won't let you scroll up unless you're in the X column. So I would just keep it in the X column, keep my eyes on the Y2, and just scroll when I need to. I see negative 69, so I know it's 3 and negative 72. But let's say you went up first, and you saw negative 372 equals positive 69. Well, then, since that's the opposite of what we need, these are the opposite of what I need. So it would need to be negative 72 and positive 3, and see how that's what it is here. Okay? So I'm just trying to give you every possible way to think about it. It's so that you can do it faster. Okay, so now that we have these two as our factors, okay, or our x completers, we'll go t and then plus 3 and then t and minus 72, okay, equals 0. And then, so this was our slide. We multiplied these two. Now we've got to divide. So we're going to take this 8 and we're going to divide by 8 and divide by 8. Okay, now 3 cannot be divided by 8, nor will it reduce, so it's slide, divide, and then bottoms up. So now it becomes 8t and then plus 3, like this. And then what's 72 divided by 8? Well, that's 9, and then you have nothing left over. And so these become our two factors equal to 0, okay? And so then, as we saw before, you can set each of these equal to 0 and solve it, or you can do the shortcut, which is the opposite of this, which is negative 3 over the front number, which is 8. Or if you see it here, it's just the opposite of what's here, and that's 3/8. Okay? And then t equals, and what's the opposite of this? 9. And then you divide by the front number, which is nothing, and so you just get t equals 9. And so since we can't have a negative in real life, that's out, and the answer must be 9 seconds. So the rocket will hit the water after 9 seconds. Okay, this concludes questions 1 through 4 in Objective 1. Please continue on to questions 5 through 8.